Yeah, okay, so my name is Samia Zeid, and I'm the head of the English unit at the Western Galilee College. I teach English courses, and my research focuses on teaching English as a second or third language, and now as English as the language of the global world. Okay, so for those people who were enjoying their coffee, welcome back to the third session of our conference. We'll focus on the topic of math and science literacy. I will introduce our first speaker in this session, who will be discussing the topic of developing students' STEM literacy in elementary school. So our first speaker is Professor LYN English from Queensland University of Technology, Australia. She's a leading expert in mathematics and STEM education. Her research focuses on mathematics, engineering education, mathematics, STEM education, ways of thinking, problem solving, mathematical modeling, and reasoning with statistics. She's the founding editor of Mathematical Thinking and Learning, and co-editor of Ways of Thinking in STEM-based Problem Solving. We are pleased to share the pre-recorded video, and it will be shared on the conference website. This is a 15 minutes recording. Anna? Can you start the recording, Anna?
Just state, since it's the middle of the night in Australia, we needed to record this in advance.
לא שומעים את הסאונד.
Okay, we still cannot hear the sound.
היה צריך לעשות share sound.
Yeah.
To your conference.
Okay.
Yeah, now we hear you.
First time I presented in Israel, and I'm very honoured. Thank you. I'm going to talk briefly about student STEM literacy in the elementary school, with a focus on mathematics where I can. But the points I'm going to make will be applicable across in maths as well. STEM literacy. Now, I love the work of Gal. He says, what are the skills or competencies needed by and expected of citizens from all walks of life for effective functioning in the information age? And his article is very good in addressing that. And so the points that I've combined with his thoughts is being able to solve the challenging problems of today, apply content knowledge from the STEM disciplines, and that's particularly important, understand and debate societal issues, and be critical consumers of information. Very important. And when you look at maths and STEM in the real world, there's increased complexity in the nature of the problems requiring STEM solutions. When we had COVID-19, I think the only good thing that came out of COVID was being able to Zoom more frequently, was that they did a lot of modelling, and the modelling was inadequate. Society was illiterate, naturally we all were. We didn't know too much about the modelling, and they were not always correct, and misrepresentation of data in the media, and this led to a lot of social controversy. So modelling in STEM has really had a global impact since COVID. So what do we need to do to improve STEM literacy with a focus on maths? I think we need to increase the range of activities that students experience, make them more thought-provoking problems rather than just simple exercise, thought-provoking, designing and modelling activities, which I will illustrate that, reasoning with quantities and statistical information, because we're just bombarded with statistical information all the time, and apply various ways of thinking. So the ways of thinking that I've been looking at, which I'll show you in a minute, they can't be content free. In other words, I'm looking at different ways of thinking, but you can't think about nothing. You've got to have content. You can't be a critical thinker if you don't have the content or the knowledge to think critically about it. And these thinking skills are particularly important in encouraging students to question the veracity of information. We get all this information, but what's its source? How do we know it's reliable? And I also think that having these thinking skills, hang on, I'll go back one, but makes students flexible, adaptive, and innovative problem solvers. And that's what I've been focusing on in the last several years, both maths content knowledge, engineering I've been focusing on, and STEM content knowledge plus thinking skills. So here are some of the thinking skills I've been focusing on. Designing and design processes. Now they are everywhere. They're in the workplace, designing suitable office workspace, designing when engineers build bridges and so on. Creativity, which is a whole host of meanings. Flexibility and adaptability, critical thinking, dealing with complexity. Now, systems thinking is particularly important these days. Systems thinking is taking into account all the parts and how they make up the whole, because the whole is often more than the sum of the parts. For example, in Australia in COVID, they closed all the airports, they closed the borders. So closing that whole system had ramifications. Airport staff couldn't get employed, cafes had to close, porters weren't any longer needed, pilots weren't any longer needed. So in other words, systems thinking, complex systems is very important. Computational thinking is coming up more and more, pertinently in relation to computation, in relation to algorithms and AI, artificial intelligence. Entrepreneurial skills are becoming increasingly important. They're really pushing that in Australia. And of course, communicating and collaborating. And that communication and collaborating has also been very important to me. I always like to keep in contact with my colleagues, see how they're going, keep abreast of the work that they're doing, the new research that they're doing. Here's just one example of an activity I've implemented that draws on the STEM disciplines, and it's on about the students had to design a partly sustainable town. Now, I don't agree with all sustainability because in Australia's going overboard, I think. But anyway, this was their problem. Your group is being tasked with using your knowledge of Queensland weather, that's my state, weather and geography, to design a town that partially runs on renewable energy. You've got to consider, you have to consider the different forms of renewable energy, solar and the wind farms in making your design. So they had to be involved in citizen design. This was a group work. They had to consider, what does the community need? How do we care for the environment? What about the aesthetics, the beauty of our new town we want to build? And empathy. Let's think about how we arrange our city. Will that be, friendly for people, for example? And the design process the students had to use in building this town was they had to frame the problem, that is, work out what the problem's about, what's the goal, what are the rules, generate some ideas. What do you think we're going to do about, how are we going to go about creating this town? Benefits and trade-offs. Now, that's really important, the town, because the students said, well, it'd be good to have the wind farm here with the windmills and so on, but no, that's going to cause a problem with housing. So we're going to have perhaps fewer windmills, or we're going to move the housing away from where we want the windmills. design prototypes. What the students did, they created a design on a big square paper with coordinates, and they made a rough design. They tested it out, looked at it, saw whether it met the rules, reflected on it, and then they redesigned and reconstructed it on a different sheet of paper, and then they critiqued or evaluated each group's designs. And here was just some of the, I'll quickly go through this because time's getting away. They had to, these are the conditions they had to follow. Decide on how many people in your town. We can't have any more than 600 and no more than 2 to 5 persons per household. Decide on how many essential services you want and where you're going to place them. But you've got to keep to a budget of $2.5 million. Pretty simple budget. And we gave them this table where we had the different services like houses, police station and so on, and they were the symbols that they might like to use on their map. The capacity houses, no more than 2 to 5 persons. Fire station, only 2 trucks. And the daily consumption. Now, rather than putting it in a formal electrical units of electricity, we just use units of consumption because that was too advanced for them to use electrics. They had to work out the quantity of electricity that they think they would use for each of these services, and then the total consumption, and had to take into account, of course, their budget. And they were told that solar panels is expected to generate around 1,200 units of electrical energy per day, costing $1,000 per panel. And the wind turbines, they will generate 300,000 units of electrical energy per month, costing $20,000 per turbine. So here are some of, you can see the coordinates, the mapping coordinates we gave them. And this is one group's creation. We had a Black Hill forest, as you can see in the middle there, and they sort of built around there, but some of them created their wind farms there or decided not to because it was too close to the forest or whatever. And so you can see the quite detailed map that they created. And here's another one that just used the codes for school service and so on, the wind farm and the solar farm. They wanted more solar farm than wind farms. And the important thing, I think, with these activities is to ask the students, how did you use your maths and your science in doing the activity? And so the students were able to identify the maths, the coordinates and so on, working out the daily consumption of energy. And we also, okay, the energy. And another one we used, it said, we estimate the size of the buildings in reality and scale them down. We use coordinates to help map out where the building should go. And they used multiplication division. And science, they explored the ideas of what materials for solar farms, how safe are solar farms and so on, and other renewable energy sources and so on. And one group decided they would bring in a recycling station. So that was an added feature that they had. So they wanted to look at how they can reuse some materials. So, and the students designed, they were given, they explained their design. They rated other groups' designs, and they were given the opportunity to respond and defend their design settlements. So, for example, one group might say, yes, I liked how you did that, but I would have had this particular building, whatever, over here. Why did you put it where it was, where you have? And the students could respond, and they'd either say, yes, that's a good idea. We could have done that. Or else they'll say, no, we disagree with that. We think where we placed the building is very, is fine. So just to conclude, because I'm conscious of time, I think from my perspective, from STEM and from mathematics, is, and is to encourage, have meaningful problems that students can tackle, have the students identify the maths and, if relevant, the science, encourage critical reflection and shared constructive feedback. And I think that applies not just to maths, but I think to literacy. I mean, I'm not into literacy from an English perspective, but I think critical reflection and shared constructive criticism, not, putting people down, but constructive feedback. Like when I edit my journal and I get, journal reviews, most reviewers are very constructive in their feedback, and that means such a lot to the reviewers, to the authors. And I also think that we can encourage critical STEM literacy and even just general literacy through reviewing real-world examples and relevant media reports. Because I'm an avid media reader, and I read all the newspapers that I can, and I sometimes read and I think, oh, I don't think that is too reliable. And I think that's a good way to introduce students to critical literacy in STEM. Okay, I'll stop there. So
Yeah. Okay, that was the end of the talk, the first talk. I'd like to thank Professor LYN for her exciting presentation. I think personally that I feel that it exceeded my expectations. As I read the abstract, now I learned new things here. And it was amazing how she combined different skills from different fields. So that was really amazing.